Hey y'all, welcome back to Talks with Arnice. So y'all, lately I've been reading the book of Jeremiah. So today I read Jeremiah chapter 32. During this chapter, Jeremiah is speaking during a very difficult season, but God is showing him that his story is not over. So as I was reading through this chapter, 4 verses stuck out to me, which was verse 8, 12, 20, and 22. Jeremiah 32:8 says, "The word of the Lord came to me." Jeremiah is in a situation where things look completely opposite of what God promised. Jerusalem is under siege by Babylon, and yet God tells Jeremiah to purchase a field. The important part is that God told Jeremiah what to do before Jeremiah could see how it would work out. That could represent obedience before evidence. Sometimes God gives you direction when circumstances are saying this doesn't make sense. Jeremiah 32:12 it talks about Jeremiah gives the deed to Baruch. I'll probably be saying that wrong, y'all. So Jeremiah purchased the field, and then he has the legal documents preserved. Why? Because God wanted the purchase to be documented. God was saying what looks impossible right now would not always look this way. The land was about to be devastated, but God was already making provision for its future restoration. That's important because Jeremiah wasn't buying the field because everything was going well. He bought it because God said there would be a future beyond the destruction. Jeremiah 32:20 says, "You have shown signs and wonders." This verse is Jeremiah remembering what God has already done for him. He talks about God's power and how God has made his name known. This is a reminder to look backward when you're struggling to look forward. Your current situation isn't the full evidence of God's ability. So Jeremiah is basically saying, God, I've seen what you can do. Sometimes you have to remind yourself of that when your current circumstances don't look like anything you hoped it would. Jeremiah 32:22 says, "A land flowing with milk and honey." God had already given Israel the land. He promised them a land described as flowing with milk and honey. So the land flowing with milk and honey represents abundance, provision, fruitfulness, and fulfillment of God's promise. But there is something really interesting about what's happening in this verse. Israel had already experienced the promise, and yet they're now in a season of loss, judgment, and uncertainty. That means something important. Having a difficult season doesn't automatically mean the promise disappeared. So those 4 verses that I share, y'all. Verse 8, God gives Jeremiah instructions. Verse 12, Jeremiah acts on what God said. Verse 20, Jeremiah remembers God's promise and power. Verse 22, Jeremiah remembers what God had already given them. God speaks, you obey. You remember who God is, and you remember what he has already done. So Jeremiah asks God in verse 25, you told me to buy the field, but the city is being handed over to the Babylons. Why? Jeremiah obeyed God, and he still didn't understand what God was doing. God responds later in the chapter that nothing is too difficult for him, and he promised restoration. God can be working on your future while your present looks like nothing. The field that Jeremiah bought looked like a terrible investment at the moment, but God saw beyond the moment. And the milk and honey stood for a place God had already promised and provided even through Israel. Even though they went through those seasons, it didn't feel like they were living in abundance. So even though your circumstances don't look how you thought they was going to look, you remember who your Father is. Sometimes things don't make sense to us. That's why you keep praying for understanding. You keep praying for wisdom. You keep talking to God. That's why the Bible says to lean not to thy own understanding. In all our ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So the way you may be seeing things is not the way God sees it. Don't limit what God can do in your life. If God is telling you to do something, do it even though it don't make sense. Because he has a plan and he has a purpose for your life. Jeremiah went through a tough season. It didn't make sense. God asked him to purchase a land that looked like nothing at the time. God can turn something old into something beautiful. Lean not to thy own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. I mean, he's going to order your steps, you guys. Trust God even when it don't make sense. Because he has a plan and a purpose, y'all. So like I said, I've been reading the book of Jeremiah. These are my notes, and I just wanted to share them with you today. And I hope y'all understand, the notes, this verse. And if it did encourage you on today, y'all, feel free to leave me a comment down below. Like this video, share with somebody else on today. And y'all have a blessed and amazing day on today. And I'll talk to y'all later.